All right, good afternoon, and welcome to our 6th Annual Faculty Development Symposium, presented to you by the Office of Academic Development and Enrichment. This office consists of me. My name is Lakshmi Devi. I'm the Dean for Academic Development and Enrichment, and we are excited to have Elizabeth Howell join us, who could not be here with us today, as Associate Dean for Academic Development, who will be focusing on activities, academic development activities, activities of the clinician educator, and practice track faculty. This office could not function without the help and the great work of Elizabeth Urbanski, the program manager, and Rod Aminian, the program coordinator. There's Elizabeth in the back, and Rod, as you say, is the one who's put the whole thing together. The goal of our office actually is to provide guidance and resources to help faculty like you in your career advancement by enhancing mentoring, collaborations, and leadership opportunities. How do we do that? We do that by putting together symposia like this and many other events. And so when you do get emails from Rod and or I, please don't put them in the make it spam or put them in the recycling bin, but just take a look at it. Today's event, of course, is the symposium on navigating the promotions process. What we're going to have is a presentation of the overview of the promotions process by Leslie Schneier, who is the Senior Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. And this is going to be followed by question and answer session, which is going to be a breakout session for the clinician and our educator track and clinical practice track faculty. The panel discussion session is going to be in this room. So all of you who are interested in this to ask questions to the panel regarding getting promoted in these tracks, please stay back. The panelists are Drs. Andy Jagoda, Jonathan Halprin, Les Silver, and Kathy Peretzine. The faculty that are interested in getting answers to their questions, who are in the research track and investigator track, we'll be going to the next room, which is Seminar Room B, and the panelists are Leslie Schneier, Claude Weiss, Prem Reddy, Steve Salton, and I. With that, I would like to mention that this is actually a video conference to our member hospitals. With that, I'd like to welcome Leslie Schneier to give us a presentation on the promotions process.
So can you hear me? Okay, so welcome and thank you for coming to today's presentation. I'm going to give you an overview of the faculty appointment, promotion, and tenure system. And then, as Lakshmi mentioned, in about 45 minutes, you'll go into breakout rooms so that you can talk about your specific areas of interest and work in either clinical activities or in research. So just before we begin, I'm curious to know how many of you are instructors. Okay, a couple of instructors. Assistant professors? Most of you. Okay. Associate professors? Some of you. And then I know there are a couple of professors in the room because I see committee members, but who else? Okay, Kathy and Shauna. Okay, good. Well, good. Welcome, everybody. So it's really important for you to attend sessions like this so that you can learn as much as possible about the promotion process, because promotion is a really important thing for you in terms of being recognized for all of the hard work that you do at Mount Sinai. And promotion is really an acknowledgement by your chair that he or she is pleased with the work that you're doing. It's also confirmation from your peers that you are a good and productive member of the Mount Sinai faculty. And another advantage of compensation, another advantage of promotion is often compensation. So often, but not always, your compensation may be affected by a promotion. So I'm going to run through some key issues with you, and then we'll get down to some more details. So one of the most basic considerations is whether the track that you're in is the right track for you. And let's do another quick show of hands. How many of you are clinician educator track faculty? Okay, good number. How about clinical track faculty? Okay. Investigator track? Okay, and research track. Okay, so it's a good mix today, and I will cover all 4 tracks in this presentation. In order to make sure that you're in the right track, you really need to become familiar with the criteria that are in the faculty handbook. And it's Chapter 5, Appointments and Promotions. Look at the track that you're currently in and look at the rank that you're in and the rank that you aspire to see if the qualities that are described there fit. And if they don't quite fit, take a look at the other tracks and see if you think that you might be placed in a more appropriate track elsewhere. The other kinds of things that you'll need to think about is whether the track that you're in and the rank that you're in are renewable, or are you in an up or out track, which caps the number of years that you can spend at a particular rank. Is tenure possible in your track? For most of the tracks, the answer is yes, and in one of the tracks, no. And again, we'll get to that later. There's information available in the faculty handbook, on the web in the For Faculty section, and if you have a mentor or a mentoring committee, that's a hugely important resource for you to rely on. So now, let's go through each of the tracks. So the investigator track attracts 2 kinds of faculty. Some who are career academics and others who are coming from industry. But what faculty in the investigator track have in common, regardless of what their backgrounds are, is an interest in and commitment to innovation and discovery. Faculty in the investigator track are expected to have independent, externally funded research programs with NIH grants as the gold standard for being awarded grants in this track. You are expected to have scholarly output in the form of publications in top journals and also presentations. As you go up the ladder, those presentations will increase from a local level to national and hopefully even international. You're always expected as a member of the faculty to do some service for the institution. As you move up in the investigator track, you're expected to move from committee membership to leadership positions. Same thing in external organizations. Start out as a member of an organization and you work your way up to leading committees and advisory councils and that sort of thing. So in the investigator track, the expectation is that you will become tenured. As I mentioned, it's an up or out track. Some associate professors in the investigator track are tenured, and professors must be tenured by the time they've reached their 10th year in this track. So that, in a nutshell, is the investigator track. Next, let's talk about the clinician educator track, because this is the other track where I think many of the people in the room, based on that show of hands, are right now. So the clinical educator track, or CE track, is really designed for faculty who have a mixture of activities. Many of the faculty in this track are clinicians, but not all of them. There are some researchers who are primarily educators who are also in this track. Everyone in this track is expected to teach. Scholarship is another essential piece of a part of the requirements for this track. Scholarship through presentations, publications. Just as I mentioned in the investigator track, as you advance up the ladder, the scope of your recognition is expected to expand. So you'll start out with local recognition, grow to regional, national, and even international recognition by the time you reach professor. Service to the institution, as with the investigator track, you are expected to serve on committees and to grow into leadership roles as your career at Mount Sinai develops. So I know we have a couple of people in the room in the research track. So tenure is possible in the clinician educator track. It would be very rare at the associate professor level, but it is conferred sometimes at the professor level. So back to the research track. There are two kinds of people who tend to be in this track. First are people who are indispensable members of research teams. They tend not to be PIs, although they can be, but more often are members of an investigator's research team. Some people in the investigator track are leaders of core facilities or have a significant role in a core facility. There is an expectation that if you're in the research track, you will participate in grant applications, that you will contribute to publications, and that by the time you reach the top level, which is research professor, you will have national recognition. Tenure is honestly unusual in this track. It does happen on occasion. And again, if you reach the title, the rank of professor, your title in this track would be research professor. So last but not least is the clinical practice track. And this is the newest of our tracks. We introduced this about 3 or 4 years ago in recognition of the increasing number of faculty who were coming in with very heavy clinical duties. And in this track, we expect faculty to spend 90% or more of their time either providing direct patient care and or being involved in clinical administration and or doing clinical teaching. This is a track for master clinicians, and you will be expected to show evidence that you're a great provider and that you're recognized by both your patients and other physicians as an excellent clinician. The unique thing about this track is that scholarship is not required. Unlike the other 3 tracks where there is an expectation of scholarship, you can be in the clinical practice track and publish and even have research programs, but it's not expected and it's not a requirement for promotion. You are expected, however, same as with the other tracks, to get involved in committees, both internally and externally, and to advance to leadership roles over the course of time. Teaching is a real plus in this track, and in fact, as you move up the ladder, it really becomes a must more than a plus. This is the only track where tenure is not offered at any level. So, and I know we had 1 or 2 instructors in the room. If you were wondering what track you're in, you don't have to, because actually instructors are not assigned to a track. And the rationale for having instructors as sort of a trackless title is because we want to give you a chance to settle in to your career here at Mount Sinai, figure out what your range of responsibilities is, and then when you and your chair discuss the possibility of promotion, that's the time that you'll be assigned to a track. And that, of course, is a good reason for you to be familiar with the requirements of the various tracks so that when you get promoted, you make sure you go into the right track. Instructor terms of appointment are 1 year in length. Typically, people don't remain at the instructor level for more than 3 years. and tenure isn't available, but it's not available in any track below the rank of associate professor. So this is a quick summary that shows the variability in term length and tenure availability at different ranks. And this is, I combined all of the all of the tracks in each rank here. So instructor terms are always 1 year. Assistant professor, depending on your track, can vary. Same thing for associate professor and professor, but in no case is a term ever more than 5 years. And as I've already mentioned, tenure is available at the associate professor level, but it's not very common. And at the professor level, it is a possibility in any track except the clinical practice track. So now that I've given you an overview of the 4 tracks, I'm going to go through your promotion submission because it's so important to put together a promotion packet that is complete and informative and makes the committee, the Appointments and Promotions Committee, really learn about you so that it can make a favorable decision about you. As you can see here, there are 4 components to your promotion submission, and I'm going to go through each of them in turn. So first is your CV. For faculty who are going to be promoted to associate professor or professor, we have a standard Mount Sinai CV format, and I can't overemphasize how important it is to follow the CV format. It's posted on the web. There's a template. It's a Word template, so you can just drop your information into it. When you look at it at first, it may seem a little daunting, but it's a well thought out template that the committee has developed over years of experience. So when I say 18 ways to advertise your accomplishment, there are actually 18 sections to the CV. Some of them are more complicated than others. These first 7 sections are very straightforward, probably self-explanatory. A couple of years ago, the committee decided, the Appointments and Promotions Committee decided that it would be really helpful to their review of candidates if they could see a bit of narrative on the activities that people are involved in. So now we offer candidates the opportunity to create a brief research profile or clinical profile describing the work that they do. And it gives you, as a candidate, an opportunity to talk in more detail than your CV, the listings on your CV might otherwise do. It gives the committee a better sense of who you are and what you do. Same thing for impact. You have an opportunity to describe how the work that you do is having an impact at the local, national, and even international levels. If you're a researcher and you have grant funding, the CV template lays out very specifically the kinds of information that you need to provide. Make sure that you provide all of it because the committee will review this section carefully. You're going to give them past, current, and pending grants, and you're going to give them information from all of the funding sources that have supported you over time. If you're involved in clinical trials, follow the CV template so that you can be sure to include the information from the template that the committee will be looking for. If you are involved in teaching activities, there are 2 different sections on the CV where you can capture that information. Your trainees, your teaching activities, again, the template lays it all out for you and sort of holds your hand in terms of what you need to provide. Administrative leadership. I talked in every track about how important it is for you to do service to the institution and to professional organizations. The CV template gives you an opportunity to describe the leadership, well, all of the service activities that you have been engaged in, including especially your leadership appointments, both internally and externally. Publications. The CV is divided into sections. The committee wants to see all of your peer-reviewed publications and other kinds of publications. We did something interesting a number of years ago, recognizing that team science is more and more the way that research is happening. We decided that being a first or middle author was not the entire story of who you are and what your research is. You may very well be a middle author on some publications and have a really important role in those publications. So on the CV, we give you a chance to annotate publications where you had a particularly important middle author role, and you can describe what your contributions were. You're going to be asked on the CV to list your invited lectures and presentations and other educational materials that you've provided. Again, the format is there for you, and you should take advantage of it and put in everything that you're doing. So CV is pretty exhaustive, but there are 3 other documents that I want to go through very quickly that are part of your promotion packet. One is the chair's statement. So your chair may ask you for help in providing information or even doing a draft of your chair's statement. And the chair's statement is an opportunity for the committee to learn more about you than what's in your CV. Again, the committee can read your CV and will get a lot of information from it. The chair's statement is a chance to learn more about you and the things that you're doing than that might not be as obvious from the CV. And here are some of the things that would be included in a good chair statement. They tend to be about 2 pages long, so it's a compact document that should provide a lot of information about you and your accomplishments and the impact that you're having in biomedicine. So when you apply for promotion to associate professor or professor, you are going to be asked to supply a list of reviewers that the committee can contact for recommendations. So you will want to choose referees who know your work or who know you. And I want to emphasize, a referee doesn't necessarily have to know you personally. A referee can be someone who's an expert in your field, who can look at your CV and evaluate your publications, presentations, grant awards, and the like, and determine whether you seem to meet our criteria for promotion. Reminder, the APT committee will solicit these letters directly. Do not ask reviewers, even if you contact them, do not ask them to send letters to you. We will take care of that on the committee end. And finally, reprints. Except for the clinical practice track, we ask for reprints for candidates for associate professor, professor, and tenure candidates. You'll want to select peer-reviewed publications that you are really proud of, that they reflect some of your best work. And the number of reprints is going to differ depending on your track and your rank. So again, you're going to have to go online and look for that information. So how do you become a candidate for promotion? Readiness for promotion is something that you really need to discuss with your supervisor and your chair. And the annual performance evaluations have been updated this year to include a promotion readiness line. And we added that to the evaluations to encourage you and your chairs to start that discussion. You may be ready for promotion, or there may be things that you still need to do to get ready for a promotion, but use that annual evaluation to have that discussion. And of course, it doesn't have to be the only time of year that you raise the issue of promotion, but it's a structured framework for doing that. You don't want to be shy. You want to get as much feedback as you can. It can be from your chair. It can be from your mentoring committee. Whatever, anyone who can give you valuable information. And once your chair agrees that you're ready for promotion, you'll work with your department to prepare the documents that I've described. So your application is actually going to go through multiple layers of review. Starting at the department level, some but not all departments have promotion committees that look at candidates and are the first step in determining if you're ready for promotion. So in terms of the review outside of your department, instructors and assistant professor actions are at chair's call. That means it really is basically up to the chair to decide when it's time for you to be promoted from instructor to assistant professor. In contrast, promotion to associate professor and candidacies for tenure require a very extensive review by the Appointments, Promotions, and Tenure Committee. And up here I listed just some of the different layers of review. There are research and clinical subcommittees of the A&P committee. There are ad hoc committees that are formed if you're a candidate for promotion or for promotion to professor or to tenure. There are votes all along the way, and ultimately it's the full committee that will make a recommendation to the dean for your promotion. So because of all these layers of review and because of the solicitation of letters from external reviewers, it can be a lengthy process. It can take 3 to 6 months once you've submitted a complete application for the committee to review it and vote on it. And just to demystify the committee a little bit, I thought I'd tell you very briefly who's on the committee, what is it about. There are about 20 people on the committee. It's multidisciplinary. Every member is a professor. We try to get as much of a mix as we can of departments and disciplines. The committee, the full committee, meets monthly. Ad hoc committees meet as needed when candidates come up. And one thing that's important to note is that if your department has a faculty member who's on the A&P committee, he or she will recuse him or herself from the review of your application, because we really want to make it an objective review, and we make sure that committee members don't vote on faculty in their own departments. So, just to summarize, some really important messages for you to take home are: first, read the faculty handbook and learn how the system works, and supplement what's in the faculty handbook by talking to more senior faculty, by using your mentoring committee to give you advice and guidance. Take time to set your goals. Be thoughtful about the career path that you envision for yourself. It shouldn't happen randomly. It should happen with a lot of thought on your part and effort to make things go the way that you want them to go. Keeping good records is something that I can't overstate. You'll be involved in so many activities over the course of your career that if you don't write down every lecture, if you don't add it to your CV, as soon as you've given it, you're going to forget about some of them. You don't want to have to scramble when it's time for promotion to go, oh, what was that lecture that I gave at such and when was it? You just, every time you give a presentation, every time something that you write gets published, add it to your CV, and then you'll have it and you'll be good to go when it's time for promotion. So that, in a nutshell, is my overview for you, and I'm happy to open it up to questions. And I just want to add that Kathy Perigine, who's the Administrative Director of the Appointments and Promotions Committee, is here with us today, and of course Lakshmi, Andy Jagoda, Les Silver, all members of the committee. I see Steve Salton, right? I don't see Prem, but I believe you. Hi. So feel free to ask questions. We have about 5 minutes, I think, before we move into the next room. Anyone? Yes.
It wasn't very clear to me what's the earliest and latest in terms of years that you can go for this process from assistant to associate.
It
You
depends.
said 4 years, but
It depends on what track you're in.
Investigator track.
Right, you can have, that showed what a single term length could be, but you can have multiple terms in any track. The only one that limits the total aggregate years that you can spend at rank is the investigator track. So assistant professors are limited to 7 years. Associate professors need to be either promoted or tenured before the end of their 9th year as associate professors. Investigator track only. That.
But the question was, how early can you go for promotion and how old?
You can go as soon as you meet the criteria.
2 other ones and teenager papers.
Right. No problem. Yes.
What if the faculty is coming from a different institution, has spent some time, and then coming to Sinai? How's that process? It's different? The time starts when you get to Sinai, or time starts when you're in another institution?
The time starts, the clock starts when you arrive here, but of course you'll have a history from your prior institution, and that will be part of the foundation for what you're bringing to Sinai and to what the committee will eventually consider when you're put up for promotion. So hopefully when you're appointed, you are appointed at a rank that's appropriate to the credentials that you're coming in with, and then when you're ready to be promoted, the committee will take into consideration the totality of your career.
The faculty has to wait 5 years to apply for the next process? Or
Nope, depends on when you're ready. You know, when faculty are recruited to Mount Sinai, there is an initial review process to make sure, to the best of our ability, that we assign faculty to the right rank and track. So it should be the right place for you for at least some period of time. But if you feel that you've met the criteria for promotion to the next rank, that's part of the discussion you can have at any time with your chair or your supervisor.
The panels start in 5 minutes, so I just want to give some time for us to break for research and investigator track people to move into room B. But
okay, but do you want to do the one last question here?
One last.
Okay.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the requirements of the external reviewers, the referees that you mentioned? How many of them?
So it's a good question, and it varies by track and by rank. So the largest number is required for the investigator track professors. I can't tell you off the top of my head what it is. It's all posted on the website.
If you look in your folder, actually, there's a grid that contains these numbers. Just if it's on the back of the track document. I'm sorry to interrupt. Just want to make sure everyone knows they have a copy. If you have a track grid, it's on the back of that document.
Does that include the number of reviewers?
It does. Yes.
It does. Okay.
So on the right side of your folder, there's a matrix for tracks. The back of that contains that information.
And so these reviewers, they're people that we've never worked with before. I know that there's some criteria.
Could be, right. So you can't, your mentor or thesis advisor cannot be your reviewer. We limit the number of colleagues who can be your reviewers. They're on the website. It explains who can and can't be used. But yes, it is quite possible that your list would include people that you've never met before, but they're experts in your field who can read your CV and say, yes, you are ready for promotion.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I think it's time to break. If you have a question, I'm happy to answer it afterwards. I just want to get the group moving into the next room, but come on up.
Thank you. We'll be resuming in about 4 minutes. Research and investigator track in room B. Clinician, educator, and clinical practice track can stay in this room. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you.
All right, everybody, we're going to get started.
All right, well, welcome everyone. I feel like I'm in a bottle here. So listen, this is, can we turn this down a little bit, or do I need it?
It's being recorded and broadcast.
All right, well, welcome everyone here and everyone at our other sites. I'm Andy Jagoda, the Chair of Emergency Medicine and System Chair of Emergency Medicine, and Professor promoted, actually I was promoted on the academic track, but now I would be promoted on the clinician educator track. So this is an informal session. We have a great panel, and I'll let each of them introduce themselves. But I've been at Sinai 20 years, and I think this year my department is moving from having more assistant professors to having more associate and full professors. So that's kind of a benchmark year for us, which I'm excited about, and it reflects my commitment to the promotion process. And the bottom line from me to you is it's really not a difficult process. It's actually formulaic. And what our goal is, building off of what Leslie presented, is to outline just how much of a formula it is and to answer all of your questions. But it's a process that has lots of rewards in it, and it's a process that moves forward smoothly if you take it on as a process and not a scramble at the last minute. Scrambles don't work. So I'll let everyone else introduce themselves, and then we'll go right into open forum questions.
I'm Kathy Perugine, the Administrative Director of the Appointments and Promotions Office, and we're basically the process people, but we're also on hand to answer any questions you might have. And I brought some cards with our email addresses, myself and the staff. We can give you basic assistance on your CV preparation also, and any questions you might have when you're putting your paperwork together. Like if you're not sure of what should go on the CV, or how to present things, we can also help you with that. Okay? So feel free to take a card at the end.
I'm John Halperin. I'm a professor of medicine in the Cardiovascular Institute. I think my appointment is on the clinician educator track, and I've been a member of the Appointments and Promotions Committee for a number of years now. I was involved early on in the development of the practice track definitions. We can talk about that as we go forward as well.
I'm Les Silver from the Department of Surgery. I'm the surgery representative to the Appointments and Promotions Committee. When you have 800,000 type A surgeons, it's a difficult job.
All right, we'll just get started with questions. Just raise your hand and I'll bring the mic over to you. Sorry, we had you first.
So my question is, I am on the clinician and educator track, and I was offered to move into the investigator track. So I want to know what are the advantages or disadvantages of moving from this track to the investigator track.
So I'll tell you, there is, no, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, there's no real advantage, and the disadvantage is it can be a more difficult track to get promoted on. So I'm not sure, I don't know your background, and I don't know what your practice is. If you are not active clinically, then it could be you don't have a choice but to move out of the clinician educator track. But if you're working clinically, but also are working on your K or have even gotten an R, there's plenty of people with K and Rs and U's and everything else who stay on the clinician educator track, get promoted. Your academic credential doesn't list what track you're on. You're professor, period, unless you're on the professional track. So I'm not, personally, I don't know the advantage. If you're in a department that has maybe an older chair or someone kind of stuck in old academic models, they might think that the investigator track is, correct me if I'm wrong, They might think that the investigator track is more prestigious, but I personally don't think that's the case.
I agree with Andy's summary. I think in the old days it was considered the more traditional academic track to be on the investigator track. We still don't make people walk around in academic garb, but the reality is there has been a transformation. These modifiers that used to be apparent that would distinguish one title from another within a given academic rank have disappeared. A professor is a professor, an associate professor is an associate professor, and the track is more we consider it when there is advancement to be made. When someone's moving, for example, from assistant professor to associate professor, or from associate professor to a full professor, on the investigator track, there would be a requirement to demonstrate a continuous stream of funding, typically NIH funding, that would not be required on the clinician educator track. Scholarly productivity is expected in both of those tracks, and it's increasingly invisible outside the institution which track anyone is on, and even within the institution which track anyone is on. But a department chair would know. Those responsible for creating the path for an individual member of the faculty would know, and it would influence the standards against which they're being compared, the benchmarks that are expected as advancement takes place. Would you agree with that, Andy?
A lot of it also depends on what you do. I mean, if you do no clinical work and not much teaching, and the bulk of what you're doing fits into that investigative track, that might be more suitable. But, like we always say, to your mother, you're always going to be a professor no matter what your rank is. But it depends on what your main activity is in the medical center. If you're doing clinical work and investigative work, sometimes you could sway from one to the other, but the majority of those people are probably on the so-called CE track, unless you're 100%, lots of grants, peer investigation.
Hi, I'm Kathy Chen from OBGYN, and I actually advise many of my junior faculty members, so I wanted to debunk some myths and just check with the committee. So the first one is for clinician educators, the number of publications in the peer review section. I know you don't want to give a number, but just in general, you've seen so many CVs. So to go from assistant to associate, what are you expecting? What would be unreasonable to even consider that?
I don't think there is a pure number. A lot of what's looked at is what have you been doing over X number of years. If your last paper was in 1992, even though you had 50 papers, that doesn't help. But if you're doing 1 or 2 papers a year and over several years, there's evidence that you're continuing to work, you're advancing, it looks like there's a future for you doing more work. I think that's more of a consideration. And then it depends, what the papers look like. You could have 10 fabulous papers or, 50 pieces of not so fabulous papers.
Okay, that's helpful.
For the clinician educator, though, book chapters count, monographs count, non-peer-reviewed publications count. I mean, it would be nice to have a spread of 10 of something, 2 a year for 5 years. But we're pretty flexed. The real question a lot of you would be asking is, how do my web-based publications count? And we've had one of my faculty who will come up for full professor has a website getting 100,000 downloads a month. That's an amazing impact. And I think across the country, promotion committees are struggling a little bit with these sort of publication resources. The clinician educator here, who's really in teaching mode, should be using the different portals that are available. And we'll hopefully later somebody will ask me about my thoughts on the Institute for Medical Education. You're at an amazing institution with a strong commitment to the clinician educator. Unlike a lot of other institutions out there, we highly value the clinician educator and actually want to promote you from assistant to associate professor. It's really not difficult here at all. professors a little bit more difficult. And the Institute for Medical Education exists for the clinician educator. But we'll get back to that.
I think that a number in any category is not as important because the committee looks at the package in terms of all types of presentations, publications, recognition, etc. So it's really the package, not that you only have 8 of these or 12 of these.
And if I might just add, it also I think is important to note the value of curriculum development is a scholarly activity that's expected and a valuable metric in the clinician educator track.
I have one second question. This is about the myths regarding the outside referees. So when we submit the list for the 10 people for associate professor, what happens to that list? Do you ever get people that you utilize on your own, or you always go from that list? Do you ask all 10, and then you have a certain number that you receive back, and then it goes to the committee?
Yes. We just solicit whoever's recommended on the list that's submitted. And it's always very helpful if you check ahead of time to make sure that they're at the rank that they're going to be evaluated or higher. Sometimes that can delay the process if we have to disqualify reviewers. So that's something you should know. Sometimes on that alone, at the beginning of this process, we'd have to go back and ask for a few more names. We don't wait for we can't wait for a sum total of letters to come in. We sit down and we judge when we feel it's a sufficient number of laudatory responses have come in. It's certainly enough to proceed. Okay.
Usually it's helpful that if you submit a list, most people will email the people to alert them to the fact that they're up for promotion and they're going to get a letter from the dean's office, etc. And sometimes what happens is a lot of people will say, sure, sure, and then they don't write. So that delays the process, and we have to get some more names. And it's also an embarrassment. We would never tell the individual that, well, you need some more letters because 3 of your people didn't want to write for you.
That's true.
So that becomes a bit of a dark hole.
Really, the only really confidential aspect is the responses we get from the reviewers. We actually assure in Dean Charney's letter that their responses will be held confidential. And well, I was going to say something else, but if I think of it, I'll jump in.
I wanted to give a tip to the junior faculty members here. So I was advising someone who did not have enough names from outside of this institution because you require that all the referees be outside of Mount Sinai. So what we did was we asked someone here whom they would recommend. So someone at Sinai whom they would recommend for this junior faculty member, and that senior faculty member contacted the referees and said, I have someone here, junior, whom I would highly recommend. If you got a letter from the Dean's Committee to review it, would you do so? And that's another way to get referees.
Yeah. Yes.
They should be not only outside the institution, but not someone who you've collaborated with closely or that you trained with. And there's a little bit of flex in there, a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what about like say you authored a textbook with somebody? You never work with them clinically, but...
Oh, well, we do ask that collaboration within the last 2 years, that you exclude reviewers, and that would include publications or grants. Yes. And one thing I wanted to mention is you are aware that we're allowing, even though we're one health system now, since it's 4 hospitals that were 5 hospitals combined, for now we're allowing people to continue to use other health system hospitals, not your own, but others, as local reviewers, just like people did in the past before there was the merger. Yeah.
I think one of the objectives here is to document the geographical impact, reach, or reputation of the faculty member seeking advancement. And so that's the objective in some of these letters, is to document the fact that this individual has, for example, a national reputation. And that comes from people who haven't worked with the faculty member directly but know their work, respect their work, and indicate that.
Can you comment on the bar for scholarship for full professors? You mentioned for associate professors maybe 10 good things. What do you expect for full professors on the clinical educator track?
This is a numbers game. I think it's very important. We know there are journals of very high impact, journals that are respected as the top tier in their individual discipline, whatever it might be, and that becomes the key metric, is the impact, the significance of the work, rather than the number of papers. We all know the problem of slice and dice, where you can distribute your work across 20 journals, but you haven't really done more than could have been done in one very well-focused pivotal document. I think that's the key. We don't count the numbers. We don't weigh the CV per se, but we do look at the impact of an individual's work on a field, their ability to have advanced whatever it is their field of endeavor might be, and try to judge that based on the not only the number of publications, but frankly the quality of the publications and the way that has affected the advancement of the field, and that's where the letters can be very helpful. So-and-so has been a pivotal figure in the evolution of a particular aspect of a field.
We got a question over here.
Regarding faculty who has an administrative role as well as clinical role and a little bit of education role, and administrative role could be directly linked to the faculty specialty, does not really translates into publication but has a huge impact, not only hospital-wide but system-wide. How does that take into account as faculty promotion? Or if there is any impact at all for the administrative work that one person does?
So this is the reason we created the professional track. And on that track, it's really, you don't have to have any scholarship at all. However, you have to be able to demonstrate a regional or national presence, depending what level you're going for. So for example, if you've built a clinical operation that has a national or international referral base, and you took it from 1,000 visits a year to 10,000 visits a year, and you won the Blue Medal Award from a society or from the state for the service, that's huge. And that will get you promoted on the professional track. If you are getting promoted on the clinician educator track as an administrator, we would be looking for workshops given nationally and internationally on, let's say, operational efficiencies. We would expect the monograph written for your society on throughput efficiencies or recruitment or development, or some sort of tangible and documented way that you've disseminated knowledge. So it really depends. You'd work with your chair along those lines if it's all professional track because there's no scholarship or clear dissemination of knowledge. If there is, you'd be going on the clinician educator track. And we have plenty of examples of people who've done it on both tracks.
So the track changes basically, or depending on the work that you do, you select?
You'll decide with your chair which track's appropriate for you. So if you're the administrator of a very successful clinical operation with zero scholarly activity, per se, you'd be on the professional track and you can get promoted. But if you're taking this huge experience you have in operational efficiency or billing or whatever, sure, you could do it on the clinician educator track. And I have to tell you, some of the chairs, not a lot, but some of the chairs aren't that familiar with the difference between these two tracks. And that's where Kathy comes in as an excellent resource, or you can reach out to me or anybody on the committee or panel.
And regarding the scholarship, it has to be a peer-reviewed journal, or you mentioned websites?
You can go full professor on the clinician educator track with almost no peer-reviewed but you could have written the master resource, the book. It's not peer reviewed, but if you've written several books, monographs, etc., that will take you forward.
I think the key distinguishing concept between what may be variously called the professional practice track and the clinician educator track is, in the clinician educator track there is this expectation of scholarly productivity. And scholarly in the conventional sense, writings and disseminations, curricula, things that are adopted widely in the field, or whatever that field might be. It needn't necessarily be grant funded, it needn't necessarily be peer reviewed, but it has to be disseminated in a more or less conventional scholarly way. Something was set down in writing and transmitted to the world in some way that others could read, interpret, and implement. Whereas in the practice track, it's focused more on the mission of patient care that we value very much at the institution on the faculty level. We realize that not only the reputation of Mount Sinai, but the value of Mount Sinai ultimately is what do we do that translates into the betterment of lives for patients. And we value the people who do that, particularly those who do it at a system-wide level. They've created a well-known practice or center or other medium through which that kind of care is promulgated. And that's the idea behind the practice track. There's not the expectation of conventional scholarly productivity. You don't have to have written about it. You don't have to have published about it. Others may have written or published about what you're doing, but it's the quality of the delivery of care that's being measured and evaluated.
Anyone with a question? Sorry, if you could just speak into the mic, it's being broadcast.
So in terms of teaching, is there any more value placed on house staff versus medical students versus like visiting rotators? Is there any difference in terms of impact?
Not necessarily. The importance is what you've developed to be a teacher and how you've measured the impact you've made. So the problem we have with some faculty, they're wonderful teachers, but they haven't thought through how they're going to assess their impact. Now, SimLab is, a great new tool. That's the laboratory for our clinician educators, and you can do you can do split trials, right, and do one intervention versus the other. Evaluations. You have to keep all your evaluations. That's a great way of determining impact. Every time you go give grand rounds in California or wherever, make sure they send you the evaluations from your grand rounds.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I had mentioned earlier a little bit about the formula. The formula is pretty simple in terms of you need to publish something. I don't care what it is, 1 or 2 things a year. You have to be on a hospital committee, medical school committee, and a national committee. It's no problem. Every committee needs people. By being on those committees, especially the regional and national committees, you begin the network. You begin the network, and the network then becomes the people who write your letters. It makes me sad when I have somebody coming up for professor and they're on no national committees. They're an unknown. It's a red flag to me. And so if I think of sometimes what gets in the way of people's promotions is no national committee work and no invited presentations. And there can be lots of reasons why that happens, but it's not a good sign. So everybody here knows somebody. Everybody here trained with somebody. Everybody here travels somewhere. So when you go to San Antonio, you call your friend in San Antonio, say, I'm in San Antonio, can I give grand rounds? And to miss that opportunity, you're just not building your body of work as a clinician educator. And it's the same with the administrator. If you're on the administrative track, every society has a operations committee, right? They have a health policy committee. They have a government affairs committee. It's really hard for me to have someone coming up for professor who hasn't been as an administrator, who hasn't taken a role nationally on one of these committees, because it means they have no commitment to service.
Do you have to be senior author on publications in order to be promoted to full professor? Do you look at senior authorship for all publications?
Not necessarily. As was pointed out, with work now being done in groups, you could be a person who, let's say, is a statistician. So the work is vital in terms of you having to be part of it, but you may be the middle author on almost every one of the papers. So it's not necessarily that you're a first author on everything.
That's why it's very important.
Sorry, Kathy, I think you cut out on the end of your statement.
Okay. It's important to annotate when you're a middle author. Okay?
All right, we have a question over here.
Most of the chairs talk about focus for junior faculty. You need to have focus and you have to be in one field that you have proven. And what I've been hearing as well is a similar attitude has been for the promotion tenure committee to look at what person's focus is and how he or she has evolved that focus into research, recognition, nationally, internationally. The problem sometimes is that we are doing a lot of things, and sometimes it is not reflective of focus, but actually reflective of a multitasking piece of being a physician or a clinician. How do you taper that down into a singular focus for a faculty? How do you determine that that person is committed in his field and has done X, Y, and Z things, which has different focus, but yet all moving towards one direction?
Let me take a stab at this. Reverse the roles. You're sitting on the A&P committee, and you're looking at the credentials of this faculty member, and you want to be constructive, and we like to see people advance here, but there has to be a foundation and a grounds to do that. And it can't just be, gee, you know, George is everywhere, he's doing everything, everybody loves him, he's just the greatest whatever there is, but there's nothing to show for it. It has to go beyond the reputation within the institution. And we're talking about senior faculty now. I'm not talking about moving somebody from instructor to assistant professor. I'm talking about when you're trying to move from assistant professor to associate professor, from associate professor to professor, which is where the A&P committee really is involved. There needs to be a trail of paper that shows what this person has done in the field. Focus is one way to do that. It isn't necessarily the only way to do it, but there needs to be a defensible documentation of the path of a career development that has an impact beyond their immediate peers.
So what some people will do is you might not have a specific clinical area of focus. In emergency medicine, you know, we kind of do a lot of stuff. But if I think of what some of my faculty have done, expertise in clinical policy development. So lots of different topics, but they've taken a methodology for clinical policy development. You're interested in operations, I think, care maps, developing a number of different care maps. That's a common theme, and the focus then is care delivery, communication professionalism, number needed to treat, you know, doing analyses of different, it can be a lot of disease states, but number needed to treat is the theme that unifies it all, and that catches my attention. Teaching technique, if you're a teacher, making the art of teaching, how to develop a presentation, and et cetera, et cetera. So this the focus per se doesn't have to be a clinical state, but it needs to have a common theme, and you can apply it to different areas.
So if the work translates into a common theme, regardless it's a diverse work,
yeah,
but does cause advancement of a specialty or a product and recognition of an institution, I think that's a valid argument to make.
Yeah, me too.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, but me too.
Can you talk about grants, grant requirements, and et cetera?
So grants are good. I'm in budget season, and I love grants. But look, you don't need, on the clinician educator track, you don't need grants per se. It's good to show your contribution, and if you're able to secure grants, that's great, but it's not necessarily something that's needed on the clinician educator grant. That being the case, I have to tell you, in today's world, clinician educators should be getting grants. And they should be getting grants from nonprofits, from the state. They should be getting grants from the Library of Medicine. They should be getting philanthropic societies. The clinician educator has lots of grant opportunities, but that's a separate discussion you have with your chair to defend your protected time. I'm sure that's what most people here spend their time talking about, but there's money for the clinician educator. Not a lot, but there is money for the clinician educator.
I have one more question regarding turning the tables on the chairs. You mentioned some chairs are still living in the old times. How do you educate chairs, in a sense, to identify a faculty is prime for promotion? Is there a service conducted by a P&T committee to help the chairs determine what works?
Does your department have a committee that deals with appointments and promotions?
Yes.
Because usually there are other people within the department who could advise you besides the chair.
Right. But sometimes the issue comes up. The people who are advising the chair are researchers and not clinicians. Or the people who are advising the chair are clinicians and not researchers. So there's a disconnect in the sense of understanding each other's work. And then chair has to respond or recognize the committees who might not understand the faculty's work.
Yeah. So periodically, we'll talk to chairs, and periodically when the chair if we've gotten to the point of a packet being submitted and the packet doesn't have the information needed, we'll help the chair sometimes understand how to make the packet stronger. But stepping back, your dilemma is, what if the chair doesn't appreciate what I'm doing and therefore propose me for promotion? That's a tough one. And you could take me out to dinner, and we could talk about that. And what can I say? I think there's 3 people here who will gladly meet with you to develop a strategy to address that. Here at Sinai, I should tell you again, the clinician educator is alive and well, and a good number of our chairs, the clinical chairs, almost all of them, get it at this point.
I think that's right. As we change things, when we introduced the practice track, for example, there was a real initiative to go out there and talk with individual department chairs, make them aware of this, see where it might meet their needs, to identify opportunities for advancement of faculty that were stuck in the mud because they were really taking care of patients all day and weren't generating the kind of scholarly work that would be required for advancement on the clinician educator track. There are also other groups within the medical center that do take up the role of promulgating the culture that we've been discussing today, whether it's department chairs getting together, whether it's faculty council. There's a number of organizations that allow for these discussions and should be promulgating it. If anyone feels that they're sitting in a department where the department chair doesn't seem to be in step with what we're saying here, it would be good for you to reach out to a member of the A&P committee. Any of us, I'm sure, would be happy to talk with you, and then we'll sort of go back and huddle and decide how can we begin a conversation or a dialogue with that department chair.
In addition, we have a subcommittee that deals with physical violence with those chairs.
Unless those 2 guys in Philadelphia that can take care of them.
I would say most of the chairs we deal with are, quite aware of the various tracks and what you need. And it's a feather in the cap of a chair to have a lot of people in his or her department that are coming up and being promoted. That's favorable for that particular department as well. I mean, it looks kind of funny if you have a whole department and nobody's ever getting promoted.
Hi.
Hi.
Not everybody gets, develops a curriculum. I think that's a great thing to do as a clinician educator. But there's another side to it. So the clinician side, I'm giving you an example of what I have done. What I did, I basically implemented a new program that, was successful in geriatrics nationally, and we promoted it we actually developed it in here, and it's sustained and it has a good result. And we've done multiple workshops, and we're doing some publications on that. Does the workshop, first of all, does that count as a scholarly activity instead of, having a curriculum, for education? And second of all, doing those type of workshop and collaborating nationally, would that count at all or no?
Totally. That's exactly what you should be doing. The syllabus for the workshop counts, and what really counts is the evaluations from the workshops. So when you write that 30 participants, out of 1 to 5, the workshop was rated 4.8, and any other feedback there, that's huge. And my guess is if it's a national group, you probably generated a white paper and published in geriatrics, or and so you're right on track. And you did a curriculum. If you developed a workshop, you developed a curriculum. It was just a workshop curriculum.
Any other questions?
All right. Well, listen. There's a system to doing it, and we're available to help you. And I wish everyone good luck. And don't hesitate to contact us if we can be of help.
Thank you to the panel. Thanks everyone for coming.